One. Hello everybody, I'm here today with the Time Lord, Tony Blake, who's sitting in his TARDIS somewhere out in the universe. Thank you for joining me, Tony.
Lovely to be here, paying you a visit on Earth.
Well, we thought we'd discuss today art, didn't we, in Beelzebub's Tales. So I thought I would start with a little quote from the chapter of art. I'm going to quote from page 451 to 452, a couple of chapters. Having said this, Beelzebub then turned to Hussein and spoke as follows. This same already definite idea there, now existing there under the denomination of art, is, at the present time, for those unhappy favourites of yours, one of those automatically acting data, the totality of which of itself, gradually, and though almost imperceptibly, yet very surely, converts them. That is, beings having in their presences every possibility of becoming particles of a part of divinity, merely into what is called living flesh. From an all-round enlightenment of the question about the famous contemporary terrestrial art, and for your clear understanding of how it all came about, you must first know about two facts that occurred in that same city, Babylon, during our fifth flight in person onto the surface of that planet of yours. So Beelzebub went to Earth, and he had a couple of adventures in Babylon to do with art. But Tony, why did you want to discuss art?
Well, that's going to take a little time to expound. I'll tell you straight away, the dominant thing which influenced me was to do with religion. That is to say, more than one person has observed, say, in contemporary Europe, that the place of religion is, in effect, being taken over by art. One of the reasons for this is that it seems that art does not entail belief. And this gives it tremendous appeal in the modern age, because art is presented as this man or this woman's creation, as you're not expected to believe that it is explicitly the word of God or coming from a higher source. No matter what we might do psychologically to explain it in terms of a higher faculty in man or a finer consciousness or something like this, still the important thing is it does not rely on belief. And a lot of people have recognized that what's involved in art is rather like this, that the participant, you call it simply the audience or the spectator, that's the weak term, has to kind of himself or herself create the meaning and substance of the work of art in themselves. It's not actually transmitted like giving them a pill or a piece of chocolate or something like this. They really got to enter into it like, well, maybe it's the kind of art I'm interested in, is in like kinds of music. You have to devote something of yourself to them. You know, you can't just sit back like a cabbage. And though some people do treat it all like that, and they are like cabbages, and just be whammed by it to say, oh, this music has an effect on me, or this image has an effect on me, on my nervous system. I think in the kind of thing I call art, there is this thing that you have to be actively involved in it. And so you're, in a way, you become a co-partner in the process. But that's the beginning.
Sacrifice. Kind of like a sacrifice, but at the same time, it's an invocation.
Sacrifice. And when I say sacrifice, it's not, you have to give. Is that what you mean by sacrifice?
Yes, that's what I meant. Like you're giving yourself to whatever it is that's inspiring you.
Exactly right. I think that's so clear, so much common sense. I know that other people would agree with it, but it's certainly in that realm where you're not expecting to be, as Gurdjieff would say, opening your mouth and having roast pigeon flow into it. You've actually got to put yourself out to some extent, go down the road. And even a simple thing. I mean, this is a silly little story, but it may serve to illustrate when I was a student. And some of us in Bristol were enamored of the cinema, especially the works, say, of Eisenstein. We heard the Ivan the Terrible series was on in London, so we hopped on the train and all the way 123 miles to London to see a film and hopped on the train back. And that simple thing gives it meaning. You know what I mean? That's
yes. It's the traveling there is part of the pilgrimage.
Yeah, like a pilgrimage, and you see again, it's kind of resonance to some sort of common sense. Why people went on pilgrimages in the past, and sometimes it was even dangerous. And I was there's another side story, very kind of shocked in the way to learn that the pilgrims often didn't have much money, and so they had to find ways of supporting themselves. And young women would prostitute themselves to pay their way to go to the sacred site they were making a pilgrimage to. Believe it. That was hard life in those days, and that kind of thing. So payment of some sort, yes. And this means that I think, to jump the gun on a lot of things I'll say, I think that because Gurdjieff's presentation and Beelzebub, like a lot of his presentations, are so, almost going to say, comically one-sided that need to be taken with a grain of salt. And he is very much a traditionalist. Now, by traditionalist, I'm referring to that whole branch of thought in the 20th century, which includes people like René Guénon and the great Indian scholar Kumaraswamy, who became very famous for talking about traditional Indian art as providing the principles, what all the overtones of objective art, higher art, completeness and so on. And you laid down all the principles for us. And there are a number of people who follow that way, and they were in themselves actually enemies of Gurdjieff, critics of Gurdjieff, as like Roger Lips's book. He was a friend of Kumaraswamy, but he mentions in it that Kumaraswamy rejected Gurdjieff as a charlatan, and he was in this torment because he liked Kumaraswamy, published some of his books, and there was the tearing down. And so there is a conflict. But the traditionalists have this idea that there was these ways of doing things in the past which were almost like systems. And there's this, I may have got the word wrong, it's an Indian text called, I think it's the Vayu Sutra. So you put me on, it actually contains all the canons of how you do a painting, in which the square is divided into 16 and you place certain items in there in a certain way, that kind of thing. There is
everything has to be proportional, doesn't it, to a certain sacred way, geometry, I suppose.
No, the proportion thing comes another realm. The Indian thing actually gives you a location where you have to put the mortals and the gods and the spirits and so on. They go in different parts of the picture and they have different sizes and all that. But they're trying to think of it as a famous Greek sculptor, actually, who wrote a treatise on proportions in the human body, which he thought he was one of the most amazing sculptors of all time. And his actual book has got been lost, but he did drive these principles, and they are to do with the ratios between different parts of the body, which I think Gurdjieff picked up on and gives it his scope and so on. It influenced people a lot because they were looking for this kind of formula. You obey this canon, this way of doing things. Well, that can lead us off on another route. So I'm pausing here to think, now how can we take it forward in some kind of way to keep all the threads in order? It's not so easy.
Because Kumaraswamy was also saying them artists were devoting themselves when they were making the iconic art, weren't they? So they were putting prayers in as they're making it. They pray before they start, supposed to be praying, or perhaps mantras or something while they're doing the art, so they keep concentrated on it.
That is right. Like in the Orthodox Church, the icon painters, they would fast and pray in making their icons. And this is quite a serious issue in itself. You need to be contemplating, what gives a work of art substance. We have one of my favorite sayings of Nietzsche, which evokes a feeling, but that's all. Write with blood, and I will find their spirit. I mean, what is this blood? It's like, actually, in essence, many people disagree. The same as Gurdjieff's Christian, that means blood of the spirit. But these are rhetorical metaphors and that kind of thing. But what makes the substance? And you see that way, you see the prayer, the fasting does something. And I think it's a very, very important point you bring in for our attention here. It means that something substantial is put into them. It's not just done on the surface. It's actually got to be something brought out of the person. And here I think of a relevance, one of my great heroes, Rainer Maria Rilke, the Austrian poet, wrote the fantastic Divine Elegies. He would say, he pointed out in these poems, a real poet doesn't express his emotions. He said that's childish. He transforms his emotions into poetry.
Oh, I like that. Yes.
And that even, of course, with dear Wordsworth, who's often really not appreciated in the depth of the man and his fellow Coleridge, how profound they were. And he said, poetry is a recollection of emotion in tranquility.
Lovely.
They knew about this inner process. They knew you go around, you're a human being, you fall in love, you get hurt, you get ill, you get happy, you hate the weather, whatever it is, and something comes out of in a dialectic. I'm now thinking of, I think it was Keats. He was quoted by Mr. Bennett in his first book, which was the first book published, which was a collection of quotations from various people. And this is by Keats, and I think it was called The Veil of Soul Making, where Keats talked about our life on earth as being this veil of soul. Why are we doing this? He says, to make a soul. He's very Gurdjieffian in this, and people don't appreciate the poets have the insight which Gurdjieff come out with, with any slouches. So they got to do something, and so we've raised these 2 pointers. The one I said, the spectator, the audience has got to give something of themselves, put something in, and so to meet what the artist has put in of his own substance. Sort of as a kind of, and you mentioned earlier on the term sacrifice. We'll leave it floating in the air for a while because it is absolutely relevant. He's got to, because one thing he's doing is doing a very remarkable thing. I would say, this is what came to my mind, Debbie. He's saying he's taking this kind of material of we call it our inner world, but that's a misnomer. It's kind of like the phantasm world where we imagine we have a mind and all that sort of nonsense. And it's like turning crude matter into gold out of this, because that's what they're doing. And it reminds me of a time once when Mr. Bennett had said to him in passing, we were having a conversation. I thought, well, Mr. Bennett, what do you think? What do you think is the most interesting or best novel of the 20th century? He said, Ulysses, by James Joyce. I don't know if he actually read it, but he came up with it immediately. He said, what? He said, it shows what ordinary man is like. You see, well, that's true in a way. Leopold Bloom is just this middle-aged Jew in Dublin at that time, living in his fantasies, trying to make a few shillings, so to speak, and going along. He's got this wayward wife, and he's got all these people in the pub. He's just, you look at this as the ordinary man, but the novel is total genius. Absolutely. How is he? And reflecting on this, I remember the comment by one of my dear English teachers at school. I had two English teachers who were really good. And we had to give talks in the course. I gave my talk on science fiction. And then he said, well, that's very good, Blake, but you know, the greatest literature always comes out of the most ordinary things in life. And I took that to heart. I think this is really true, because what are we doing? We're taking these ordinary things of life and transforming it into gold, magic, meaning. And this is what artists do. So I think let's start up to hell with Mr. Gurdjieff and being in Babylon and all this specialty and all the rest of it. But there is a thread I will get on to now, and I hope in a moment come to William Blake, if I may start off in a slightly different direction. And that's to do with a function of art. Now, Gurdjieff presents his idea about it as that real objective function of art is transmit knowledge. As far as I can read it in that chapter you started, that's what he says, to transmit this knowledge from here to there. Now, there is one field in which this becomes prominent and very obvious, but I'm not surprised if people don't remark on it. And that is the field of scriptures. Now, I say, oh, why are we going to scriptures as we change the subject of art? No, for me, the scriptures are art.
To me too, I think they're beautifully written, the way they're done. They have little bits, they have art in them as well, but they have got so much feeling put into them when they're made.
You got it in one. That's absolutely right. And it's getting this is, as we know, all these the stories woven in the Bible. You know, this richness there, and you get a source from which people can draw a nourishment for people. So definitely, and it, of course, I can hardly stop my mechanical association and going on to the miracle of the King James version of the Bible, in which the whole the English language soared to unprecedented heights. You know, as everything, regard the lilies of the field. I say unto you, verily, Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And you go, whoa! I want to find the field of lilies and just throw myself into them. It just, you listen to the lilies. But anyway, I had a comment about scriptures from my old friend, and he's still with us, Simon Wakeman. He was a very close pupil of Mr. Bennett, and I remember he became head of religious studies at SOAS, University of London, before he retired. And he said, you know what happens about religion? You see, what most commentators on religion these days don't even countenance. He suggested, they said, say, that with Christ and so on, there is some real higher order event. Now, just in that event, like I say, the same as Muhammad's revelations from Gabriel, whatever it is, there's some absolutely an action. And the people around at that time are just in touch with that action. You don't need any theories or explanations or whatever it is. It's experience.
There's no fake news with it. It's all genuine.
Or genuine. There was no issue about that because no doctrine. You didn't need doctrine. Then what happens? He said, well, it fades. You know, this is what happens. It fades. So what happens? There's an aim at preservation. So this is the task in historical times. That means in the time of writing, which has to do with writing. This is like this whole fuss with Muhammad saying he's illiterate. I can't read, he said. I can't read, all that, which I think is put into the story deliberately to
You
make
mean when
it.
Gabriel came to him and said, write down this, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
in the Quran? Yes.
Looked at him, and he said, I can't, he's doing all this. So, and we know later, of course, he had various people, things were dictated to, and editing going on, which usually the Muslims don't like any reference made to. Either there were people actually involved in it, it's a team effort or something had to come out of it. Or it's the kind of hazards of it, clear with Christianity, with the Gospels and the four Gospel writers, and how soon after the event did they start writing who borrowed from whom and all that kind of thing. And there are controversies like that, but the essence of it was they put it crudely, they produced masterpieces, which have this incredible resonance through the ages. And these are descriptions, these are words, you see, they're not the direct experience at all. Now, Simon added something very interesting. I think he was concentrating or aware when he said it, mostly about Indian scriptures. And he said, because they use a certain trick, and that is to say, they write the scriptures in a language or in a dialect which has largely gone out of use, because it harks back to a previous time. And they do this because this implies that the scriptures come from the same time as the real event. So they're authentic, you see, this kind of thing. So there's all that mystery in it, Kathy. But before I get on that, Debbie, I really want to emphasize this, that in my view, there's a tremendous neglect of the genius of the people who write the scriptures. But they are men, and usually men, unfortunately, who create these things, and they're extraordinary.
It's like it's the learned Akadan that's mentioned in Gurdjieff's group. It's a society like that, someone that is learned, that's putting stories forward.
Yeah, making these stories, these narratives, like, in a way, that's kind of metaphysical point. Let's dwell on for a second or two, David. It's like they've taken this event, which is like a totality, a wholeness, and they put it into narrative stories. It's gone something beyond time into time, and they bring it to time as a story. Once upon a time, there was. And in doing that, you draw upon this incredible, whatever it is inside our brains, our culture, whatever it is. And I always cite at this point the most incredible kind of first steps, which for me was the Sumerians. And I get teary-eyed over in there. Enuma Elish, which is Sumerian.
Fantastic. I love the Enuma Elish.
When on high, and it starts the first line, when on high the gods had not been named. And I go, and they knew this, they created this thing, and it was, and then interesting, they say that the shepherd talked to his son and the fisherman to his son, unfortunately not to the daughters, it was to the sons, and discuss it and so on, because by telling these stories to each other, they weave something together. The stories are there. Unfortunately, I don't think of today's as what we have soap operas for, because people can chat about what happens in the soap opera and they can communicate with each other. But the essence, I'm getting away from it. It's so hard to get away from it, to keep to it. There's things about the sheer genius of these scriptures, how they create things we do marvelous. Like, I'm married to Evo, who's a Finn, and adore the Kalevala, which is the Finnish myth, which has created the country. Kalevala is a story of these incredible beings and incredible device which creates all wealth and so on. Incidentally, the rhythm of the poetry was taken over by Longfellow in his poem Hiawatha. But anyway, and even like the Arthurian legends, he absolutely helped create Britain, created, I think all people have to have their story.
Well, it's like myth is a very important part of culture, isn't it? And it's something I remember Joseph Campbell was saying was disappearing in our modern world. And it's something William Morris was trying to bring back, wasn't he, with his, when he went to Iceland and all the northern countries to find all the Icelandic sagas, because he was aware that myth was disappearing. You know, thankfully after William Morris, we then started having Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and the Inklings, who maybe they're the last people that wrote true mythical type of sagas.
Well, maybe have a look at this, because I remember to support you, one of C.S. Lewis's wonderful books. What a incredible man he was. He called it The Discarded Image.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the medieval image of, you know, which has these weird creatures in it. But maybe there'll be, let's leave that for now. And I hope I will get back to it and you can remind me. But as saying that, trying to tie it a kind of common sense view of Gurdjieff's transmission to future generations, because this is what the scripture writers did. They were said to be witnesses to a supernatural event. And incidentally, this is in that same spirit, I think, that Mr. Bennett called his autobiography Witness, because he wanted to say he was witness to the supernatural, the psychotelios people, the evolved people, and so on. He always wanted to, he was very self-effacing, but he was just a witness, and he even called himself sometimes a blind witness. But it's just giving a testament, you know, it's this testament. So you get this Old Testament and New Testament. I don't know, I'm hearing it, testament, this is what it meant. I mean, these men, women, whoever they were, testified to what they had seen, you know, and spoke of it with others. And this is remarkable, you know. And now Gurdjieff does go on, like in the chapter on religion in Beelzebub's Tales, and he talks about the scriptures and where you said the main critique he mentions that it is written these days, or is in these days, rather in a way which leaves out the feelings, and you can't understand anything about these events without the feelings. And he goes back to his dominant triad, you know, of the three centers working together for it. So without that feeling, he's had no substance. So how is that? And you know, the probably showing me the horror of, you know, these new translations of the Bible, as they're called, and so on, and how dull they are.
Yes, I remember in the 80s someone did a fiction version of the Bible, and it was quite a big seller. He wrote it like a novel, because people found the Bible hard to read. But I suppose it was a good way for people to learn what the stories were. But I hope in later life they would have gone and actually read the actual original stories in the Bible anyway.
That's supposed the original. What was the original one? There was the original text in Hebrew or Greek, whatever it was. We don't know these languages. And Latin, we don't know that language. You see, the original is often questionable. But that's because you see, you can imagine somebody writing that novel. But I haven't heard about what you say about these events, and it depends again how good a writer they are. They, again, as we were talking earlier, somebody could do a comic about it, and it would be marvelous. I mean, there are a few people who tried to do that, like Robert Crumb. He did or created a comic based on Genesis, which is very, very powerful, and other people have done similar stories. But yes, so
yeah, I met Robert Crumb many years ago.
Did
Yeah, back when I was in the comic industry, I can't remember, it was the late 80s, it must have been. But he'd come to promote a film of his life, which I watched, which I must admit, I don't know if you know about his life, but it was very sad, and you know, he'd been through a lot. But from what he'd been through, all that tragedy, that he could create these sometimes strange stories, but at other times very magical stories.
Very human stories. I'm looking around for something I want to show you on this. I probably can't find it, which is because it's one of his. You can do a bit of editing on this, can't you?
But he was an incredible man to sit and listen and talk to about why he did art, and I wish I could remember it properly to use it now, but he was saying art's such a wonderful way to express your feelings, but I suppose it was also for him a kind of an art therapy, doing all that, wasn't it, to get over everything that happened to him.
That is true. Actually, the one I just wanted to show you, I had it here somewhere around me, and I found I had an old copy of Mr. Natural. Do you remember?
Ah,
Yeah, you do. I mean,
yeah.
what thing is, you see, so you've touched on this thing. You say we don't have myths these days, but and that's in a straightforward way is true. But I have a but in there, and I think, well, what about Marvel comics? You
You know, I'm a DC girl.
oh,
Anyway, come.
you know, Stanley, Stanley, kind.
But
But
yes, Marvel comics, carry on.
but you know, it's I'm surprised nobody, as far as I know, actually gone into you know the intricacy of their mythological world. You
There
know,
are degrees you can do in it, that kind of thing now.
I think there are.
Mm.
But I thought this is just what's happened in that the old myths lost their power, whatever it is, and you start creating it. But what they draw on is so interesting, of course, in the Nordic legends, like in Thor, um, and they do things like, even there's an element where they've drawn on Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, um, many other things I can't think of now, of
Well, I
course.
suppose
You know.
that they're bringing, they know that the power of the myths of old religions and faiths are so powerful that they still need to use them today. You know,
Yes,
you couldn't make up the story for, could you? That's come from a saga. And
yes.
people still love that kind of thing. People are still drawn to it. They might not know why, but it must be an inner thing inside us that draws us to these.
And it was very weird because it started about 50 years ago when they, like in India, they were producing these comic versions of their myths and Mahabharata and so on, put into comic form. So that was coming out at the same time as you got these Western American styles coming out, and to tell these stories. But let's pause on that. I feel we got this kind of, well, where do we go from here? And I'll turn to you about William.
William
That
Blake.
key element in it, this quote I sent you, which I'll probably misquote now. If man or woman not an artist be, they cannot be a Christian.
Yes, I've
Have you,
actually got that quote over here somewhere, but yes, because he was
it's,
talking about, and where is it? Yes, a poet, a painter, a musician, an architect. The man or woman who is not one of these is not a Christian. And then the writer goes on to say, in short, art and Christianity are interchangeable terms to William Blake.
look at that. Now look at that. Now
Yes.
that fighting talk. Uh,
Fighting talk. And he goes on, William Blake goes on to say about how practice is art. If you leave off, you are lost.
wow. Yeah, he said, you know, go to the end. You know, go right to the end. But of course, for him, you see, the imagination was divinity. You know? Now, you go to the writings of Gurdjieff and the fourth way, the imagination is, oh, yucky. It's deception and falsity, right? And it's very, I think in a way, quite destructive that, that term was used in that way by Gurdjieffians. He
But
was,
isn't
you
he
know,
saying that imagination misleads us? Gurdjieff was saying we don't use imagination correctly, and now we just use imagination to daydream and wish
well, you
fulfillment, but not, you know.
get this thing correctly, which excuses everything. So the incorrect, you know, yeah. Because extraordinary things he puts into the third series, his great last book, was about actually consciously utilizing this thing which he said is threatens us with the utmost degradation, namely this imagination, as one of the most important tools for our transformation. And he turns it all on its head. And he said, well, it's effectively, not in so many words, but effectively saying, well, you have to act as if you had a real eye. It's only by pretending you have a chance of realizing. And this is quite something, you know, because you can get into this kind of, I call it a puritanical attitude. Oh, don't imagine anything, it's because it's false, it's not what actually is. But if you know you actually, just pay attention to what actually is, you might as well slit your throat, because there's no promise anywhere. There's nothing, because you're stuck on what actually is. There's no way out. And I know, for me, I would say, well, Gurdjieff has just sort of reluctantly admitted this loophole about the imagination. And of course, it means, excuse me, you have to do it correctly and all that kind of thing. That it's, there's some pointers in it, of course, that this is something which is actually, to my mind, permeating all of this kind of practical inner work. Because even in the so-called exercise, the only way you get to do the operations in it is by imagining it. And so it's just like, you know, look at your, you know, pay attention to your head, and you've heard me say this, and realize that there's this energy or there which is common to all your impressions and so on. So you start off imagining it. What else can you do? You're imagining it, you know, or even, you know, with something of your physical sensation, you start off by imagining it. You look at your hand, or pay attention to your hand, and it's like you're actually imagining your hand, you know. And this
but isn't that like creating a thought form? You're imagining it, so you're making that thought film, and hopefully you can work on it.
Yeah.
Expand.
You see, thought form is like, you actually, what imagination, it creates a form in a finer substance of some kind, whatever jargon you like, because that's what it is. If you're not fashioning in a physical substance like clay, so that's an interesting thing we can come back later. And you're doing something with some invisible substance, by analogy. It don't fit true, but by analogy. And you create, as you say, a thought form. You imagine something. That's what it is. Let's go quite through. Has the practice there of should be enhancing our capacity to imagine and give, as you say, give rise to a thought form. And some of these can then have a result in the tangible world that maybe is part of their danger, because there's this common impression, people going around full of this absolute diabolical crap in their heads. You just don't want any of it to seep out into the common world. Because, well, you look around the world and you see, you know, look at a development site or something, that's what you see. It just, you know, destruction and all the rest of it. But I don't want to go into that for a moment. I can't handle it. Let's stay with this this kind of creativity. It is yeah, that way I've been trying to describe it. There is an element in it which is important to bear in mind, that is of an intention. In yourself, you have some kind of intention or values which are guiding you. And even indeed, in terms of inner exercises, can't often do it very well, try to get people to appreciate that, in a sense, one's attitude, one's disposition, engaging in these things matters a great deal, because you may be doing it in terms out of vanity, out of, you know, worshipping your own power or something like this, and it ruins the whole thing. And how
Yeah,
can
wouldn't
you
that
do
be
it?
a misuse?
Well, misuse, of course, yes, you see, but this is the whole problem in all of these things, use and misuse and so on, how to do it rightly. But you get, one thing is to, as far as you can, to get clear on your intention. And this is some protection to do with it. So that, you see, now if we make a bridge between imagination a la Blake, that's my forebear, not me, and
William, or Will I am.
Will I am, that's right. Isn't it amazing? Will I am, there you go. It's
Because
a
he even
sapling.
wrote that on one of his pictures, Will I am. It's the first time I ever realised what the word William actually is saying. And then that pop star used it many years later, but it was like, yeah, William Blake, Will I am. And he used his will.
Isn't that amazing? They're in front of one's eyes all the time. And you get that, and you say, this is our making, and this is, how can we not make? Um, mm, it's interesting, you know, that probably around the time of the Renaissance, that since the modern idea of an artist was made, because before that, it seemed, well, this is not entirely true, but more partly, it seemed that the person we now call an artist was imitating. That is to say, he would imitate something in nature or something, which was the idea. What they were doing was imitating something actually created by God. So this gave rise to the phrase, it was a novel by Wyndham Lewis, who's totally weird man, into it called Apes of God.
Apes.
Apes.
Oh, apes of God. I get it. Yes, they are.
It's aping God in a sense. So that was a certain disparaging look on it. But you do get the cult of the artist starting in Renaissance time. Look at Michelangelo and all these people. They were just superstars. And this idea of somebody being a creator crept in. This is like something which comes up when some of us, you know, your friends will have done this, I know, felt that about the Middle Ages again, the superiority, the quality of the anonymity of the workers. There are still, you know, some people who put the name to things. There's this notion about how the right attitude was to have it anonymous. And there's still that sense of the superiority of things which don't have a human ego attached to them. You know, that's right. I remember in realm of folklore, the great English composer Ralph Vaughan Williams, he was like Cecil Sharp, looked into folklore in England. He was a passionate collector of it, and he speaks in reverence of coming across this tune. He made a Dives and Lazarus, which he said how he'd been waiting all his life to encounter this tune. And there's, of course, no composer for it. You know, it was in the culture. So there you get the sense of things. Now I feel something different opening up in our conversation. Things are coming to being, and there's nobody doing it. And it has that echo of relinquishing the fruits of action, which stands in contrast, of course, from what we can easily see in modern artists like that idiot Damien Hirst, just running a business. This renunciation at the end sort of sets it free. I had this reminds me an echo in my memories of comments somewhere Bennett wrote about his work, particularly in the dramatic universe. He said, and sometimes he was quite in a way full of himself. He said, great ideas are being revealed through me, but I mustn't care what happens to them.
Oh. Mm. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. That's all right. That's not caring is really, really important, because we have here an issue, I think, in this question of art, the well, it's like I'm having inside me somewhere a sort of picture of two strands, one of art and one of religion, uh, where art seems to have gone, condensed down into human egos, and religion is supposed to release you into God or the higher, whatever it is, and so some ways they're antithetical. And there is in this another criterion, an issue, which came up from Shivpuri Baba. Remember Shivpuri Baba? You heard about him? Conversation said, and in the conversation, Bennett was talking about something like how beauty can lead one towards God. And Shivpuri Baba says, no, beauty cannot lead you towards God, implying that beauty gets in the way. Oh, this is a big challenge historically, because you say, look at Islam. You've got the event, the tremendous forces released in the societies, in the great cities. And then what happens, it's incredible seeing how the whole special alphabets were developed to write down the Quran. And it's developed into this graphic art. It's incredible flourishing, this geometrical art coming out of it, And the calligraphy itself becomes, but still something like Shivpuri Baba would say, oh, no, like this. It's just the outside. And so we have this battle which has been there. And now I'm reminded of this terrible event in English history because of that thug, Henry VIII, who invented a whole, he fostered a certain religion in his own image, just to get his own ways and to get money. So he went around destroying the monasteries. But, they destroyed the whole tradition of wood sculpting in England. They smashed stained glass windows, statues, everywhere. They were worse than the Taliban.
No, that's why we need to use your TARDIS to go back in time and save it all.
I know, but it was so, this rejection of the image, because this thing about the image is Moses and Aaron, I'm a great fan. You probably never seen it, of Schoenberg's opera, Moses and Aaron. And the fight, Moses is the person of the word, Aaron of the image. Builds the golden calf. The people need something to look at. He's doing his best. He's trying to make God palatable to the people, you see.
With a lovely golden calf.
Yeah, look, beautiful, isn't it?
But also with that, he was doing it as a present to God, his golden calf, but also for people to look at. Because sometimes people do need something to look at to inspire them, to keep them on the path. I think myself, all this don't look at anything, just pray and keep it in your head. I don't think it's a very healthy way of finding God.
No, this is this kind of controversy goes on. Some restraints. Some people are kind and can allow for variations. But you do get these strict people that say, when you're having an idol, a little statue or something to bow down before, but it goes to even having a thought in your mind is also an idol.
Well, I found it quite, I thought it was awful that they thought that people would mistake the idol for God. How stupid do they think people are? Surely it's just an image to look at. I know they're bowing down to their idol, but they're really bowing down, hopefully, to the on high.
I'd say you're expressing a modern attitude.
Yes, I know.
Because, there's my picture on it. It's very hard in just a few words to sum it up, because I looked into a few things to do with how things were, say, very ancient Greece, 1000 BC and so on, the times of Homer and so on. And everything was very concrete, so everything, there wasn't a kind of separation between mind and body as there is now. And there wasn't a separation between the symbol and what it symbolized at all. It was just, it was, how to say, very, you see, I'm struggling here, very intimate. So I just hesitate to say, actually condemn everybody and say, you know, is it there? Well, because in a way, you know, we people put God in the idol. Or look at this most extreme case, which was also taking place through Henry VIII and the Protestant Revolution, to do with the Mass, because the Protestants insisted that the bread, the host used in the thing, was only a symbol. But the Catholics say it is the blood of Christ. And that was horrific conflict happened because of this. It's strange, we got onto this, you know, Debbie, this thing about dealing with art and so on, about image and the power of the image. It's how...
It's all ecumenical arguments.
Well, there's some deep psychology in it. And because there's something in image which is decidedly weird. And that is to say, something instantaneous in it. Yeah. An image of doom. I think about this relationship, you know, the work of my friend Matthias Living, you know, is a master of memory and so on. He teaches people to do it. And the key thing, as you know, in this memory is you link something you want to remember with an image. I've just done tiny few experiments because I'm intrinsically lazy with this. I said, it's so absolutely instant. You know, you just think, there it is, bing, what's happened? You know, it's like a spot weld.
Memory palaces work.
Yes. But there's, because this is becoming of crucial world importance now in terms of just seeing a program on BBC4 last night about memes, the whole notion of memes and how it's being developed on the net and so on by various Twitter and so on. And there are also whole companies set up now to generate memes, and the whole phenomenon of things going viral and so on. It's all to do with actually they're getting this, I don't know, deeper, more powerful understanding of the effectiveness of these things and how they operate at such lightning speed.
Mm-hmm. That message in a picture with just a few words works.
They do, and people are actually researching what makes them work. You know, how do you do it? And then they're becoming clever at generating them and so on. But here is something which comes. There's a big circuit here, but still coming back to this question, Gurdjieff, about imagination, making images. You see, imagination is like, you know, making images. That's what it means. Making these things. There was that lovely story I have to throw in here, I must do, by who is it? Alexandra David-neel. I think she was a French woman who studied Tibetan Buddhism and became very respected in Tibet.
She went in disguise into Tibet. Yes, and lived out there for a long time, disguised as a man. I have all her books.
Oh, yeah. Remember her story about how she tells against herself. Of course, she was into the Tibetan Buddhist technique of visualizing, and she did this visualization of a monk. She was one of her stories, the monk, and she said, it took me 6 months to get rid of him.
Because she hadn't been taught how to get rid of it.
Wow, whatever it was, you know, that's probably true. She hadn't been told that. But you see, there's one thing, and it's so instructive to me. I think we even get into making these things, but you're quite right. You have to know how to unmake them. But what a story it was. She had made this image, and then it, how to say, was dominating her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, which leads me to another foray, if I may, going back to Mr. Bennett, because he was quite happy with imagination. And he would say with people reporting about the exercises, I say people speak and say, this is just imagination. And he said, yes, it is imagination, but not just imagination. Yeah. And he treated it in a very positive way. But one thing he was very appreciative of and tried to get people to understand, and that was what he called sacred images. Because in the sacred image, is the promise, which is that, of course, you yourselves are involved with the development or making of the sacred image, but the sacred image can be above us, superior to us, and in a sense, draw us on. And this is amazingly important because we're in a situation, as I said, if we're just looking at what's actual, we just stick there, there's nothing. Where do we get the skyhook? Where do we get the lever to push us out of this bloody thing? What can call us? And you get this weird thing, but something we're involved in creating can draw us up. Now, is it like that? We don't know. I'm just thinking now, jumping around brain, Goethe and the eternal feminine, that's something drawing us on, this kind of thing. But let's go back to the sacred image. It's like he liked very much the Islamic image of the Insani Kamel, the perfected man. He said, which in the West in Christianity is, of course, becomes Christ, and he becomes the imitation of Christ you follow. Because all these different religions have the same operation in them. Just give it different names and say, how do we do this now? And then by putting your attention on, now, what is it on? You see, on the sacred image, but it becomes sacred because you pay its attention in a certain way. It's like the stories of the development of sacred sites, these magical places you go to, like Glastonbury, touch me, the tombs of saints and so on. How does something build up there? Because somebody stops and pays attention in a certain way and tells people of it and gets the thing, this, the story of Mullah Nasruddin, how he was, donkey died and he sort of stayed around and made a little shrine for it. So eventually he had pilgrims going to the shrine of his donkey because he sat there and paid it attention. And that's just something you feel. It's like something has happened here and that's,
you've attracted an aura to it or an atmosphere to it.
Yeah, that's right. But I've just had in my life by chance some almost experiments in doing that. I just it seems like not have it's not as if one has any magical power, but just don't know just what you do. It's like an invocation. I remember one place in Gloucestershire where I had a centre and there was outbuildings and converted them into a sort of chapel, and it was known as a chapel. But they just by doing that, putting a cross up, naming it that, suddenly this energy developed inside this place. I remember a friend of mine just was collapsing in front of the energy, and you think, what is this? And so for me, it became a sort of paradigm, but it doesn't help me explain anything. Thank God I can't explain it. But just you set it up, and it just needs some, almost like saying somebody or other, just to take it seriously, and it will build. This place. This is kind of very interesting how it's developing this conversation, because it's about art, and it's more than art. It's art is weaving in and out of this in various ways, but it is art. You have to do this artistically. This is this particular thread that led me to think about of course, I've incredible Gurdjieff exercise called the Four Prophets, and when he talks about these centers, one form, he speaks particularly about atmospheres over cities which have had sacred individuals in them.
So it'll be Jesus over Jerusalem,
Yes,
Muhammad over Mecca.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And his famous Saint Lama over Lhasa.
And Buddha over, oh, I forgot
And
where Buddha is.
over Benares. That's
That's
where he was 40. And he actually pictures like this, you know, a cloud. It's some of Gurdjieff, you know, it's kind of intoxicating. Really. He's very physical, concrete in what he says, you know, and sometimes you, what, can you mean this? Because they come referred to later on, you know, in done experiments in this realm. It's absolutely fascinating. But you just see that he says that this happens, there is that cloud and you can concentrate. And he said, well, what, how is it done? And you get that kind of cloud, is it concentrated? I believe he said it, but my own studies, it seems like it, like I said about a place like Glastonbury, or Shaska, an obvious example. You've even people, you know, feeling like a little place like Avebury, and I mentioned the pilgrims before, so you get people, and they're just ordinary folks like you and me, and they're stealing and lying and swindling and joking and fornicating and all these sort of things that people do, you know, kind of bumbling along. Oh, they sit down, they get a priest, and they do their prayers, whatever. It all seems like, how on earth could something come out of this? But there's a background theory in Gurdjieff which says that, yeah, something does come out of it. It's a kind of distillation. And finer energy comes out of it. Actually, like, how to do it physically, vertically, and hangs there.
But you are imagining it happen as well, aren't you? So it's coming back to imagination. This is
Yeah.
proper use of imagination.
If we do the simple, you know, look up, you know, it's as naive as that. If you want to look down, you look up, you know, kind of. Then he said, well, there is and he intimates that there is a further refinement process, right, like a distillation, you know, get to one fraction and then you fractionate it again, which is possible. And this can generate a finer substance, and one can engage with this, but only engage with it consciously. So this conscious stealing. So it's all there to be used, but people are making use of it. But just as insofar they can wander into the place and get a kind of baraka, as it's called in Islam. I love that, by the way. I do that because it's stuck in my mind. It was being in Ayub, which is outside Istanbul. They have this mosque and they have this lovely courtyard around it where people have stalls and sell things, and they have tombs. And it's doing, this couple got married and they came for the blessing of the saint and tried to reach a bracket. They actually did it physically, like they reached their hands out and went, you know, poured it over themselves like that physically. It's beautiful. And there are some gestures and Gurdjieff's movements which have that in them, you know, and it's just actually physically.
And in Tai Chi and Qigong movements I've done is about that. You're bringing it into yourself. And when I used to go to Sai Baba prayers and bhajans, at the end, we had to do that with the incense as it was being passed round. You put it to yourself.
That's right.
Over yourself.
Well, this is a wonderful realm, isn't it? All this stuff you say, well, that's quaint. There's Eastern warriors do that kind of thing, but because we suffer from being, in a sense, indoctrinated to this thing about, oh, it's symbolic. It's not really there at all. You know, it's just symbolic. You know, I know I can certainly admit it in myself. I see it creeping in a lot. There's not actually a finer substance there, because it's a finer substance. How could it be lifted with my hands? You know, this is, you know, it's not logical.
Beliefs, Tony.
But then you say, there's belief and there's belief. There's a belief of the kind of, you might get enraged and go and start killing people. And there's a belief which is kind of this participation, which is something like, can I say this? Thing like the very medium of art, which is this transubstantiating imagination. And I love that word transubstantiate because it has to do with the mystery of the Mass, but also how Gurdjieff used it. I don't know if you come across this because you haven't done the movements where, you make efforts, you imagine people make a lot of efforts and go to a lot of movements class and so sit at the end. Now, there's a specific intention which is advocated. Not so easy to execute, and you say to this prayer, may these, the results of my labors, be transubstantiated in me for my being. Yeah. That's an amazing prayer, absolutely.
It is. I was told by somebody in the Gurdjieff work to use that when I think it was something about giving up a habit or something, and he said when you want to stop doing something, use that prayer instead.
Oh.
Use that. For example, you want to give up smoking, instead of having that cigarette, you say that prayer so that then you can use that energy, transubstantiate it into you for something better.
Sounds quite a hard thing to pull off, after you've done so much labor, you've created something that makes a lot of sense then. The step. You see, it's all like this thing about the pilgrims. They do this effort and so on to get there, and something is okay, and it can be sort of set free. But that's because they've done that work, that effort, that sweat, that put something into it. And so this is similar. Why people do extraordinary things. One time I was filming actually in Morocco, and it was very dodgy, being a white man and so on. Even though when I was in Morocco, as you already don't know, I officially became a Muslim.
Mm.
But it wasn't enough to protect me because I remember seeing this people measuring their length. They fall flat on their face, get up, flat on the face, going towards a pilgrimage. Now, we had this as one of the Gurdjieff movements, and sometimes we did it taking, I don't know why we came to a great risk, actually falling on our wrist like this. It's very, very striking. And there is this also in Christendom, there's this wonderful place in Italy, which is the place of the church, which was blessed by St. Michael himself, the archangel, actually sanctified this church. The pilgrims used to go up to it, up this hill, doing that prostration. And I saw some processions even a few years ago, people doing that along the road and that kind of thing. That's all to do with this part about putting the work in. You put something in, your body is there usually to provide that, because that's one of its contribution. You don't, not just sitting on your fanny, bullshit. There we are. And so this is making it concrete. So this is, and then there is this little hint. Again, I had a brief conversation with Bennett about it once, oh yes, but Hamelinadar, one of my favorite characters. Remember him in Babylon?
Yes.
Talked about the soul, he's just criticizing himself, and he rushes off, giving up all this, and he went to grow corn or maize. And Bennett said, this is a symbol for working on himself. And then he had the conversation about thought, and Gurdjieff hints from time to time about the manifestation of thought, or thought manifestation. Just a few places he puts that in, and then had a few intriguing but tantalizing.
Some people see that Hamler Din episode as that he gave it all up, but I never thought he did. I thought he just gave up the outside world to go and work on himself.
Well, I thought it was straightforwardly that he gave up philosophizing about it and went and did something.
Yes, did it rather than thought about it all the time. Yes. which is something you often talk about. Be it, do it.
Well, you do it, yeah, do it. I mean, this is one of the basic appeals of Gurdjieff. He doesn't piss around with this nonsense about being airy-fairy and thinking high thoughts and so on, because he said you've got to go bloody dig the garden. And
That's right. Yes.
guts in it, man. This is a great appeal of Gurdjieff. Not this mamby-pamby higher things.
Yeah, and you're not just told it, you have to go and think about it, work on it, do physical exercises as well as look at yourself, your inner self.
But this thing, trying to answer, you have to do so your own flesh. There's still this residue, all this, I think, about this going, it's just all going up here, people are into kind of thinking and feeling, yeah, but actually one's body, because it's one of the things which have been obsessing me for a year or two. I wanted to do this seminar in the Higher Moving Center, and then it got cancelled because of the virus pandemic. And I don't know what I would have done, although I had some starting points. But I wanted to say, and there's something emerging now, and this incredible, I'll throw it in because I'm rambling off in that direction anyway, it may be slightly off the point. I think action happening now. And I argue that over the last 2,000 years or so, it's something which started, if you go back to Plato and the early fathers of the church, so to speak, its Western tradition, they really identify spirituality with the intellect. Absolutely, there's no question about it. And it seemed to me, about 1,000 years ago, this wave came in India, of bhakti yoga, devotional yoga. And in Christendom, there's more emphasis based on love. And I think it's an extraordinary temporal synchronicity of Europe and India. They would come up with the same kind of shift of attention, so that you have to have this is pretty cruel, you have to have your heart in the right place. It's the thing that came up there. Then I think what happens, and this is my pure supposition, it can be mocked and so on, but in the 19th century, what began to emerge into the equation was the body. And it's then, was the end of the 19th century, one can only talk about Europe. And this extraordinary figure like this man Del Sartre, who drew the attention to the body as being the very means by which we could become spiritualized. Yes, through the body. And then this other thing came in with Stubbings, I think was the name, a remarkable woman who traveled in the Near East and so on, and developed some of Del Sartre's ideas, and where she started this thing which involved, I think, which is incredibly important, connected with other things, that is, up to that time, there was no way really for, hardly any way whatsoever, for women to express their bodies. It was all suppressed, It wasn't until at the beginning of the 20th century that schoolgirls could have had costumes which enabled them to play games. But there was enormous creative explosion behind it. Stebbings was the one, Isadora Duncan, and all these people. They did tremendous work because they released this power of the body, and in a way, we were at the vanguard of it, partly because of the centuries of repression. Like I was intrigued in some of the dance manuals from the 17th century. They remark how doing dancing was about the only chance educated, well-off women had to have any exercise whatsoever.
Yes, because they're supposed to sit indoors and just do a bit of tapestry.
Exactly. It's bloody hell for them.
I know, it's terrible.
But this, it came up. So this resurgence is coming from the body. Now, I've looked into this, and there's lovely book by a man. I'm trying to remember his title now. To say it. Something like the sinking of the body, and then the sort of it's beyond mindfulness. There's still mindfulness. People take it as something mental. Be mindful, and they.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry, it took me a while to figure out
Okay,
what you meant. Right, I get it. Right,
got it. You see, there's all these overtones you've got to watch for. But there's this guy. This guy's name excuse me. He did enormous. But he was remarkable in that he's a neurophysiologist. But every year, what he does, he goes by himself into the wilderness, completely by himself, and survives in this as best he can. He goes to a place he doesn't know. He doesn't use maps or anything like this to encounter the raw intelligence of his body. And he's pointing out time because, someone like me would just die at the thought of it. But he's emphasizing, just like sentence like Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff's image of the carriage and the horse, driver, and so on. He said, one of the things he said about the carriage, he said there's some oil in it, but it only gets, it can't get spread around if the carriage just goes on nice roads. It has to go through rough ground for it to be spread around. And this guy, this American, it was brilliant. He's just absolutely into that because he's talking about, when you can't find your footing, when you don't know where to go, and how this moment to moment adjustments got to be made. It's the most incredible, compelling read, this thing. And I thought, this is really what it's about. So how have I got onto the body? I don't know.
He must have been a very learned guy, because he must have known what plants he could eat or how to hunt, or basic things like how to find water to drink and things in that period when he's going off to do that.
Had some knowledge, and he was taking one of his models. He took was this guy called I give him a name, the Alpine Pilgrim. There's the figure whose body was frozen. I think it was in the Alps or somewhere, and he was hundreds of years old, this body. And they found, what equipment he had. He was miles up, a very, very hard place to get to. He knew his video by himself, had a bow, had certain kind of tools, and he worked out what he was eating, and how he could just, go up, thousands of feet up into this place and survive. And he only died because of his fellow men, because there was somebody shot an arrow into his shoulder and wounded him. Yeah. But you see, the point was he was this man, completely by himself, up there, thousands of feet in the ice. Nothing.
Survive, because I tell you, it puts me to shame. When this lockdown first started, I thought, I'm going to go and walk around Britain. Then I found out all the B&Bs were shut and all the hotels. I was like, well, where would I stay? And that was the end of my idea of going and walking around Britain. I wish I'd had the courage this man had. Just go and survive. You will survive. I don't have a tent or anything, because that was on my mind of where can I buy a tent? The shops are shut. I can't even go and buy a tent. But if I could have learned from that man, I could have done it.
Yeah. I was very proud of a friend of mine, Ray, who I'm very anxious about, and I think he may be quite ill in Liverpool. But he used to get his wife to drop him off in the country somewhere, and he wouldn't go into a hotel. He'd sleep under hedges. And I thought that was, for me, amazing.
Yeah. I wish I had the courage to do it.
I remember sharing a hotel room. He said, "No, I want to in this room." He went outside the hotel to go in. He was caught short once when it pissed on him.
Oh no. Well, it must be also something else that put me off with the beginning of lockdown. The first week was hot, and then the second week the weather turned really cold, like winter. And I was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't go for my walk around Britain. I'd never have survived.
Real snowflakes, you see. But we've gone into this realm of this really belong. It's kind of like work on oneself, but it's the it's having it's like having something in you, which am I just saying this? I don't know, which is can engage. Okay, these things you're not just build up these things in yourself, and not just you're sitting in yourself like, oh, you know, like Mr. Natural, look how marvelous I am, da 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 da, like just being or just being here. No, and it just what it does is enable you to encounter. If I'm just saying this in this moment, but you see, this is the part about this is the capacity can be called one of the great arts of life is how to live. What does it mean? Because it is a matter of engagement. It's not only this thing about you have money where you can, well, you used to be able to stooge around the world and buy yachts and go to extraordinary places and have sumptuous feasts and whatever it is. But it's not really be able to buy things in, because it's like this question which comes up, which is in Total Recall, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the travel agent who's talking about going to Saturn and stuff. Character. What's it's the same thing wherever you go in your holidays. Then he told him, you. And the thing. It's like, it's unfair on them, but partly unfair. Like Americans, wherever they go, they take their own culture with them. They don't actually encounter the culture. And most Westerners, like most people, are like that. They don't go to a foreign place. It's useful they're going to it because they keep the barrier. Now, how can you get across that barrier and live in that thing, live in that other world? How can you be there? And it's just coming to me and talking, but I'm just talking.
You reminded me again of Alexandra David-neel. So when she went to Tibet in disguise as a man, she didn't go like what we're saying, like taking her own views and everything. She had to become like them, didn't she? So she could get away with her disguise. So she had to do it differently.
Yes, it is. But I've never thought about this reciprocal exchange between us and art, and vaguely thinking of one example whose name I can't remember. I think he was might have been a musician who eventually took on playing Gurdjieff music, but he had a period when he was calling him from statues, and he's was Western and Eastern, and they felt there was something in there in their postures, and he tried to, he spent ages going, looking, staring at them, wandering around until one day it happened, and he sort of entered into them. And
not physically, but somehow communicated with them.
Yeah, but let's be honest about this. Yes, well, let me allow myself to use the word became them. Yeah, like again, I think it's Elliot or Rilke, which one? About him, man, becoming the music while the music lasts, and it's becoming the music. Not you get this idea of you're listening to the music, you're looking at the work of art. You see these simple, seemingly innocuous verbs create a barrier, because what is in the forefront is you.
You need to get rid of you so you can properly experience
the
experience.
Exactly. And and this is a sweat. We all gone through this sweat, trying to deny yourself. The more you try to deny yourself, the more stuck you are in being yourself and being there. And it was you making the effort, but then something, and so it just, most of us, I suppose, it just, at times we don't know why, you kind of disappear, and there is the music, there is the painting. You don't need anything else. You don't need an observer to look at it, or auditor to listen. That's extraneous. It's extra. You know, it seems, and the people say that's a bit mystical. So maybe it is a bit mystical, kind of thing. You know, there. This is, I think, a being thing. It's a part of being. And interesting, Mr. Bennett, and he wrote in an earlier version of his dramatic universe a beautiful chapter on art, and he related the art to eternity and to being. And he gave a wonderful discourse on the Van Gogh painting, The Bridget Owls. I don't know if you can picture that one, The Bridget Owls. It's exquisite light of the southern France there and so on. He just talks about this eternity in that moment, and how he has conveyed it, rather like that, well, indirectly like that. I can't help quoting it, so I will that couplet in one of Shakespeare's sonnets, which are, by the way, being online 3 every week. And he says, he's talking about this fragility of love and so on and so on. And he said, oh, may this miracle have might, that in black ink my love may still shine bright. Isn't it perfect? It's a contradiction. The black ink as the light of his love. The written word which he's doing would outlast him, and all that sort of thing. But that's one of the miracles in art, you see, is that this chap, Van Gogh there, he scraped those old pigments off his board and slapped it on there. And that moment has now lasted for more than 100 years. It's wonderful. So to hell with Gurdjieff, as I say. And then,
So, on that note, maybe we should bring it to an end.
all right, I could, you know me, I could go on forever, but it'd be hard on you and hard on the readers.
We've been talking for over an hour and a half, so I think this would be a good way of ending it on that one, because I thought that was quite an interesting climax of how it could end. But thank you, Tony, for everything. And you've still got your website going, your diversity as well. And if people were interested in contacting you, they could come through the diversity website.
I don't know. I never know about these, because now it's awkward because my email has changed. And so you might put on your website, write down my current email. Can you do that?
Yes, okay. Do you want to just say it anyway for now, or do you not know it?
I'll say it. Anthony.
Yep.
At anthonyblake.co.uk.
Excellent. I will put that in the not the comments, the little box down below. But thank you ever so much, Tony. That was marvellous once again.
Once again, it's just being with you. It's just, it's having this, I don't know, so I don't mind anymore. And I just
the time has just flown by.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, I shall press stop, but stay on. But thank you again. Bless you very much for coming and talking to us all.
You said press stop, but stay on.
You stay there. I'm going to press stop for record, and you stay there, and we can say our goodbyes. But thank you, Tony.
Thank you.